In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can use Spring Boot to build web services. We're going to go over the basics and make sure you understand how this framework works. So on the left, I have some information about the metadata of the project. So I put in a group and artifact ID, a name, description, packaging, everything on the left. And then on the right, I have my dependencies. So we're going to start with the web dependency because we're trying to create a web application. And then I have dev tool just so that I don't have to restart the application every time, so that we can have live reload and everything. And I have REST repositories. So this is going to expose endpoints for us. Spring is going to take care of looking at our annotation, see the classes that we're using as our domain, and then it's going to create all the endpoints for us. And then we're going to use the H2 database. So that's going to be in memory. I don't want to have to do a whole MySQL setup for this. So we're just going to use an in-memory database. And then another dev tool, which is Lombok, so that I don't have to, type out all the getters and setters, so we can just use Lombok for that. And then of course, for our persistence, we're going to use Spring Data JPA, and that's pretty much all the dependencies that I'm going to be using in this project. Now, this is just going to be a little demo just to cover the basics. It's not going to be like an entire application. Obviously, we wouldn't build a real application with an H2 database or anything like that. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this button down below and generate the project. And then I'm going to open it in IntelliJ. So I'm back in IntelliJ and I've opened the application and I'm going to navigate to the main class. So this is a typical Spring Boot application. We're in the main class and everything is red. So I'm going to see if I can import everything. All right, so I'm gonna keep everything in this file just so that I can make this simple. So I'm gonna go down and let's just say I'm gonna be managing, let's say, product, right? So I'm gonna create my domain or my main class that's gonna represent the product. Let's add in some fields. So I'm gonna do private and let's give this an ID. So we're gonna do long ID. We'll do private again. Let's do a string and let's say this is the name of the product. And let's do another one for the maybe price. So let's make this a double. And this is going to be the price. And let's do another one for a Boolean, for instance. And let's say is in stock or something, right? So that's going to be like true or false on whether or not this product is in stock. And then on top of the class, let's do add entity, because we know we're gonna want to save this in our database, and we need getters and setters. So for this, I'm gonna add the data annotation coming from Lombok, and also we need the no args constructor. So I'm gonna do no args constructor from Lombok and all args constructor. So let's do that. All right, so now I have all my constructors, and then I have my product. I have my getters and setters using the data, and then of course it's an entity because we're going to be persisting this in the database. And it's complaining here because we don't have an ID yet. So I can go down here and do add ID and also add the generated value. So I'm going to do add generated value from Java persistence, and let's just say we're going to make this the identity. So let's do the strategy, and let's see if I can get some auto completion here. So this is what's going to represent our entity class. And what I want to do next is to create a repository for it. So I'm going to do interface, and let's just call this product repository. And of course, we know that this is going to extend the JPA repository. And we're going to pass in the entity that we want to manage, or tell JPA what entity we're trying to manage. So that's going to be our product that we just created. And we have to pass in the type of the primary key. In that case, that's a long. And that's pretty much everything we need to do for this. Okay, so we can come back to this and add in some more methods, which is something we're going to do later. But for now, we're just adding everything here so that we can have something going. So let's go into the main class, and what we want to do is to just save some of these products in a database. So let's add a bean for the command line runner, and let's just gonna call it this start application. Well, that's not the starting point, but let's just say run, for instance. And we're passing in some of the, let's pass in the repository. So we're gonna do product repository. We're gonna add this repository in there, and oops, this is gonna return a lambda expression. So we're gonna do return, let's see, all right, I get auto completion. And in there, we're gonna save some products. So what we're going to do is we're gonna call our repository that we're passing in, and then call the save on it, and then we're gonna pass in a new product. So we're gonna do new product. So let's scroll down a little bit. So you can see this ID is long, but we don't want to pass the ID because it's going to be auto-generated. So I'm just going to pass in null for the ID. And for the name of the product, let's just say this is a computer, a Lenovo. And let's say the price, which is a double, let's say this is $10. And let's also add the in stock, which is going to be, let's say this is true because this is in stock. And we're just going to do this a few more times and save a few more object in the database. So I'm going to put those in and then come back. So I went ahead and added some products in our database. So I added some Lenovo, Dell, HP, etc. And one last thing we have to do, we need to put the bin annotation on this so that this can be in the context. So we can go ahead and run this app, and then all of this information should be saved in our database. But when I run the application, I want to at least show something in a console. So I'm gonna go at the bottom here, call the product repository and find all. And what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna loop over these, and then I'm gonna say for each product, I want to execute a piece of code. So here I'm gonna do, let's just say s out, so we can print something out. So get the product, let's say get name, for instance. Okay, so we're gonna print all the names of the products that we have saved in the database in the console, just so we can confirm that everything is working. And the last thing I want to do before I run this, let's put some configuration for the database. So I'm gonna go into the applications.property file. In here, I'm just gonna do spring data source. Oh, not that one. And we want the URL. All right. So we have a H2 in memory database. So JDBC and H2. And then we want the MEN for in memory. And let's give it, let's say product DB. Okay. So that's going to be the database name. So product DB is going to be the database name. And just so I don't have a conflict in case I have something running on port 8080, I'm gonna run this on port 8085, for instance. It can be any port, you don't even have to do this. So everything should be in place. So if we run this, we will save all of this information in the database, and then in the console we should also see the name of every product that we have saved in the database. So let's go ahead and run this. So I'm gonna run and let's take a look. All right, so I'm gonna open this up. Okay, as you can see, I have all of the information here printed out, which means all of the products that you see here, they were saved in a database, and we were able to retrieve them and then print their name on the console. So now, since the application is still running, what we can do is we can go ahead and take a look at the database and see what we have there. So let's head back to the browser and let's go to localhost, and we want to go to 8085. / we want to go to H2 console, enter, and you can see we have this database here, which is in memory, but we can still access it on this UI. And I'm gonna see if I can make this a little bit bigger. And what we want to go to is to go to the product DB, and before I connect, we need to change this. So this is going to be JDBC and then H2, and we need MEN, and here we have to pass in the name of the database. So product DB, let's double check, and that was product DB. I'm gonna copy and paste it just to be sure. Oops, and paste it here and connect. All right, so we're in the console. Maybe that's a little bit too big, and you can see we have our product here, and we can click on that and run it. You can see everything was added in the database properly. So now what I want to do next is to create a controller so that we can access the same information in the browser. So let's go back to the application, and let's go back to the main class. And I'm going to go down below the, I'm going to collapse this for now, and then go below the interface, and I want to create another class, and this is going to be our controller. So I'm going to do class, and let's just call this product controller. You can also call this resource. I like to call it resource. and this is gonna be the controller. Of course, we need to annotate this with @rest controller, and I'm gonna put the all our constructor as well, so that I can add the repository inside of this class, inject it in, so that I can use it in there. So what we want to do is to create a field. So we're gonna go down here and create another field here. So I'm gonna do private final and pass this in. And because we have the all args constructor, so it's gonna create a constructor and then pass this guy in the constructor. So then what we can do is to create some methods to expose some of this information on HTTP. So I'm gonna go down and scroll up a little bit, and let's create a first function or method. Let's say public, and that's gonna return a list of product, and let's call it list or something. The name doesn't really matter, doesn't really take any argument. And what we want to return here is the product repository that find all. Okay, so that's going to return a list of all of the product, and of course we need to import this from Java util. And the next thing we need to do is to add the annotation. So this is going to be a get mapping, and for the path, not params, I'm going to set this equal to product with an S. So whenever the user goes to the browser base URL /products, then it's going to return the list of all the products. Let's just copy this again, and I need another one to get one product. So I'm going to put the ID here, and let's call this get let's say product, because this is returning only one. So then I'm going to change this, so it's not going to return a list, it's only going to return one product. So I'm going to return just one product, and in the repository I want to call well, first of all we need to get the ID. So here I'm going to do @ and this is going to be the ID, and I'm going to get the ID, so that's going to be a long ID. This should go to /products and then ID of the product, and then here I can call the find by ID. So I'm going to do find by ID, pass in the ID, and don't forget to call the get, so that we can get this one item. So whenever we do this, it's gonna look, find this product by that ID, and then return it. And we need another one for maybe saving, and I'm probably gonna put this maybe right down there. So this is gonna be a post mapping, so post mapping, and this is gonna go to product, and we're gonna change this to request body, and they're gonna send us an entire product. So we're gonna say product and pass the product here, and here we're just gonna call the save on the repository. So here again, call the save and then pass in the product. So at this point we're ready to test this. At least we should see something whenever we run this application. So let's go ahead and restart this and try it out. All right, the application is up. So let's go ahead and check it in the browser. Let's minimize this. And now if I go to 8085 and I have to go to /product and enter. So you can see I have all the products. Okay, so this is a JSON format, but since this is not really clear, I'm gonna go ahead and paste the same URL in Postman so that we can have a nicer view of this. So let me open Postman, and I'm gonna go ahead and paste the URL and send. All right, so if I scroll down a little bit, you can see we have all of our products, and they were added in the database and price and in stock and everything. So let's go ahead and maybe duplicate this, and let's go to let's say 2. So we're gonna see if we can get the second product, so the product with ID 2. So it should be the Dell latitude here. So we're gonna send a get request to product/2. We're gonna send that, and you can see we have that. And if I change this to 5, do we have 5? Scroll down. Yep, that's gonna be the Dell Inspiron. So if I send this, you can see we have the Dell Inspiron here. So everything seems to be working. So let's go ahead and send a post request and see if we can add a product. So let's test this function that we added in. So this one right here, which is accepting a post request and then passing in the product. So let's go back Actually, I can actually copy this. Maybe not. So let's go back, and I'm gonna use the post request this time, and this is gonna go to products, and I need to add the body of the request, and this has to be raw and JSON format. And here I'm gonna add the JSON. So here I'm gonna put the name, and let's just say Apple Watch, and I'm gonna copy this, paste it a few times. I think it was 4. Next one, let's double check. So we need the name. The ID is gonna be generated on the fly, so we don't need to pass in the ID, but we need the name, the price, and the in stock. Okay, so let's go back. So the name, the price, and the last one was in stock. All right, let's just copy this and paste it here, and we're gonna pass in, let's say this is in stock. We don't need anything else after that. And the price is going to be, I don't know what those cost. Let's see, $500. I mean, Apple products are always expensive. So if I go ahead and send this post request, it should save in a database, and we should get the response back, which is going to be the object that is saved, and we will be able to see the ID on it. So let's go back to the get. So the last one, let's send that request again. So the last one here has ID 7. So whenever we send this post request, this Apple Watch product should have ID 8. So let's go ahead and send it. As you can see, ID is 8. And if we go back, run this again, at the bottom, you can see what we just added. So everything seems to be working. We don't have a method to actually edit a product. So let's go back and see if we can fix that real quick. So collapse this for now and scroll down. So here's our controller, like this entire class. And I'm gonna go ahead and copy this post request and go down and paste it. And what I'm gonna do is to just change this to a put request, and it's gonna go to /product, and we need the ID of the product that we're trying to update, and we're gonna get this the same way. So I'm gonna get this path parameter here and paste it down here as a first argument to this method. So we get the ID, and then we get the product and the body of the request, and we can do something quick. We can say for this product, set the ID to the ID that we get. So that way we can just update this, because you will have an ID, and Hibernate is smart enough to say, oh, this is an existing product, and then find that product with that ID, and then update the information that we put in here. And then we can add one more to actually delete, so that we can complete our CRUD operations. We're gonna change this to a delete mapping, and it's gonna go to /products, and then just the ID is what we need to delete. Delete this, we don't need it. Delete this line, we don't need it. And here, instead of calling save, we're gonna just call the delete by ID and pass in the ID here. And of course, this is returning void, and we don't need this return because it's returning void. And we need to give it a different name. So let's say delete product or something. And this is the update, so we can call this update. You can do update product or just update, since you're already inside of the product controller, but I'm just gonna edit here just to be clear. So we have one to edit a product and then delete a product. So let's go and rerun this and wait till it comes up. All right, you can see the application is up. Let's go back to Postman. And I'm gonna duplicate this again one more time and go to delete and /8. So I'm gonna issue another get request. So I don't have 8 product. I only have 7. So I can pass in 7 instead of 8. So 7. So if I send this request, we shouldn't get anything back, but it should be a successful response. So send this. You can see 200 OK. And now if you refresh and scroll down, we only have 6. We don't have the 7th. And let's try out the update. So let's duplicate this, send a put request, go to the body, and we need to pass in the ID. So here we're gonna say, let's say the first one, we're gonna give it the same name. So I can just copy this name here and put it here. Oops. And let's say, how much is that? That's 509. Let's say this is cheaper now, we have a sale going on. It's 400 and it's in stock. So if we go ahead and send this, you can see now the price is 400, ID is 1, which is the ID we pass up here. And if we go back and send this request again, you can see the change is also reflected here. So now we can update and delete and create, and we can fetch all the data. So this is pretty much our CRUD operation. There's one last thing I want to mention. So I'm sending this put request and I'm passing in all the different properties on the object, right? So for instance, if I don't pass the in stock, for instance, so let's say I remove this and this is going to be the first one, 400, and then I send it again, you can see it gives it the default false. Or maybe this is a bad example. So if I put this back, right, let's say I didn't send the price, remove the price. So if I send this, you see the price is 0. Because when you're sending a put request, everything that you don't specify, they just get removed, or they're set to the default. As you can see, this is the default for a double. So whenever you're updating your data, there's a difference between put, which is updating everything that you send, and everything that you don't send will be set to the default. And if you don't want this behavior, then what you want to do is a patch. We can go back into the backend and create a patch endpoint, and we can only send whatever we need to update, and everything else we don't want to update will not be changed. They will just remain the same. So I just wanted to point that out, the difference between put and patch. When you're putting to update, then you have to send the entire data. When you're patching, you only send the properties you want to update, and everything else will remain the same. So this is the typical thing that you would do whenever you're trying to build like a web service or something. And that is also true for other frameworks. So if you're using like Node.js or Python or whatever the case might be, it's going to be something similar in terms of architecture. So all this work we just did, actually, we didn't even have to do it because we have the Spring Data Repository. Spring Data Repository can manage this for us. Like, we don't even need this controller, and all the work can be done. Now, sometimes what you would see is, for instance, you can say this is now a generic, so you can pass in T here, and then instead of product, you just say this is going to be of type T, and then you can just use this across different domains. So if it's products or users or something else that you have. So that's another way that some developers would do it, and it can work, but that's really a lot of work. So we don't actually want to do that. We want to use the Spring Data JPA for that. So yeah, so we don't need to do all this manually. We can use the REST repositories. All of this functionalities will be in place by Spring. We don't even have to do this. And that's what I'm going to show you right now. So what I'm going to do first, so that I can show you how this whole thing works, I'm going to go ahead and comment this out, and I'm going to go ahead and run this. Got an error. So maybe I'm going to comment out the entire thing. So I'm going to go up here to the bottom and comment this out. Okay, so the entire controller is commented out, and I'm going to go ahead and run the app. Wait till it comes up. All right, so we can see everything is saved in a database. But we don't have a controller. Okay, so that means that if we go back to Postman and we send a GET request to retrieve everything, we should get an error message, okay, not found, because we don't have this route defined in the application anymore. So what we can do, we can just go on top of our repository here. So we created this product repository, and it extends the JPA repository. So we can just add the annotation here. So that's going to be the repository REST resource. So that's what we're looking for. So once we add this repository REST resource on top of this repository that we created for this domain, then all of this is already taken care of by Spring under the hood. And I just realized that I have a typo here, so I'm going to go ahead and fix that. This is supposed to be product repository TR and refactor. Okay, fine by me. All right, so probably should change that to over here, but we don't even have to worry about this at this point. So let's go ahead and rerun this, and then we're gonna go ahead and check it on the browser. All right, so application is up. So if we go back to Postman and we go to products, so remember we don't have this route anymore. So if I send this request, I can bring this up a little bit. So you can see now, even though I didn't create any controller or anything like that, you can see that we still have the data back. Okay, so we have the first product and then the second one, third one, and at the bottom we have pagination information. So you can see we have a page of size 20, total element is 7, total pages is 1, and number of pages is 0. So you can see that Spring took care of creating all of this for us, and we didn't even have to do anything. And what we can do is we can consult one product as well. So if I go back to this other one and I say, hey, give me the product with ID 5, I send this request, you can see that it still does work. Okay, it looks a little different because it's using a different format to present the information, like this format right here. You can see it's an object, and then we have embedded, and then inside of that we have the array of our product, and then at the bottom we have some pagination information. So this format, it's called Hatus. Let me see if I can find it online. So let's see if I can just Google that, and it's supposed to be I think it's ATOAS, something like that. There it is. So this is the format, like this format, which is hypermedia as the engine of application state, which is just a way of transferring information back and forth. There's nothing fancy about it. It's just something that we all agree, and then we're just gonna do this every time we need to communicate. You can see they have some example down there. So this is the format that this, well, oops, this is too big. So this is the format, this Hatus, I don't even know how to say this. This format is the format that's being used here to present this information with this embedded product and all the product, and then their reference and stuff, and then also some pagination at the bottom. And another advantage with this is you can actually specify parameters in the URL. So let's just copy this and open a new tab. So if I go here and I say, since you remember, if I go back and you remember we have all this pagination information down below, so we can use that and then send requests, and we will actually get the response back with the appropriate data. So we go back here, and let's say I want, I'm gonna put a question mark because I want to add some parameters. Let's say I want the page 0, so I'm gonna set page equal to 0. And if I want to pass another parameter, I can put the int sign, and then let's say I want the size, which is how many elements that I want in that page. I want the size to be, let's say 2. Okay, so we're gonna grab the first 2 elements in the array on page 0. So if I send this, you can see that we have 2 of them. So you can see we have this array right here, and if I collapse this, you can see the next element and also some pagination information at the bottom. So you see now the size is 2, so we have 2 elements, total pages is 4. So I can, because we set the size to 2, then we have 4 pages. So I can say, oh, all right, then give me page 3 and send this request. You can see on page 3, this is what we have, and you can see it gives me the number of pages here. So I'm on page 3, and then I have 7 element total, and this specific page has 2 element because that's what I'm requesting here as the size. And this is also really important because usually your data is going to be very large. So for instance, if you have a list of products or users, you probably have like thousands, sometimes millions of users. So you don't want to do like a find all to like look into your entire database and bring the entire database. That's just not very performant. So pagination is actually extremely important because it's just useless to try to load the entire, let's say, I don't know, 5 million users that your application has in a database. And another thing we can do with this is we can actually sort the data. So for instance, if I go back here, let's go here. So we requesting page 3, so let's request the first page. So let's go here and say, hey, give me page, that first page is page 0, by the way. And let's say we want 3 element. And we can also sort this, so I can put another parameter. So to add another parameter, I'm gonna put the int sign and then say, hey, I want this to be sorted. So you put sort, and then let's say we wanna sort by one of the fields that we have in the domain. So if we go back to the application, and collapse this for now. So this is the domain, right? So this product here is the domain. So we can sort by ID, by name, by price, and by in stock. So let's say I want to sort by name. So I'm going to copy this and go back and say I want to sort by name, and I can also pass the direction. So I can say ascending. So I put ASC for ascending. So if I send this, you can see now I have Dell on top, and then Dell, Dell, Dell. And since we requested 3, we only got 3. So let's say we request 10. I don't know if I have 10, but that should give us everything. So let's send this. You can see Dell is on top. And as we scroll down, we have H and then L. So you see that it's giving us this sort is working because it's giving us everything sorted alphabetically. And I can do it descending. So I can do DESC and then send this. You can see now I have iMac as the first one, MacBook, and then Lenovo, HP, etc. Another thing I can do is change the field that I'm sorting by. So let's say I want to sort by price. So I can change this to price, and then I want descending. So the most expensive is going to be on top. You can see this costs $1,000. It's on top, and then 600, and then 500. And I can do the same like ascending as well. So ASC, and then send. And you can see the cheapest one is on top. Another thing you guys, maybe you didn't notice, is that the ID is not present here. So if we go back to the browser, let's go back. So you see that when we had our controller before, I'm pretty sure this information is cached because this is not what we're supposed to see. But that's gonna do for what I wanna show you. You see that we still have this ID here, which we had when we had our controller. But if you look in Postman here, let's go back to the get request and send that and scroll up. You can see that we don't have the ID. Okay, so there are ways you can configure the REST repository resource. So let's go ahead and I'm gonna go ahead and show you how you can at least do a little bit of configuration. So if we go back to the application and let's go to the repository here, and right here when we're running this, we can pass in another piece of configuration in the constructor, and that's going to be the repository rest config, and that's what we need to pass in here. And then what we can do before we save anything, we can call that and say expose ID 4. So if I put just the dot, you can see we can customize many different things here. And what I want to show you is to expose the ID. So we're going to say expose ID 4. And here we have to pass in the class. So we're going to say for this class, the product class, just expose the IDs for those. And then we run the app. All right, the application is up. So let's go and check it out in the browser or here. And if I send this request again, now you can see the IDs are there. So 1, 2, 3, etc. Another thing we can do with this is sometimes you have your domain and you have a lot of properties on the domain. So this is not a good example because we only have ID, name, price, and in stock. So we have like 4 properties on this class. But sometimes you have like, let's say you have 16 properties on the class or 20 properties on the class. And whenever you, let's say you access the endpoint, it's going to give you everything. So sometimes you don't want that. Sometimes you only want certain properties on that object. And there's a way in Spring you can specify what properties you want returned to you, and we use projection to do that. So let me show you an example, and then maybe this is gonna make sense. So let's say let's go back. So I'm gonna go down here, right? And I'm just gonna create another interface here, and I'm gonna say interface, and let's say I'm gonna call this the web projection, for instance. And then I'm gonna do this, and let's say this is gonna return just the name. Okay, so let's say get name, which is gonna be a method that exists on your product. Okay, so because we're using the data here from Lombok, we have all the getters and setters, and we know we're gonna have a getter that's gonna be get name for this specific property. So let's say for the web, we only want to show the name, and we want to show the let's say if it's in, let's say the price. Okay, so let's go down, and let's say we want to do a double, and then we want this to be get price. Okay, so we know that this get price is gonna exist inside of this because we have all of our getters and setters. So let's say we wanted another one for the, let's say mobile, right? So let's say this API is gonna be accessible. Well, this is an interface, so this will be mobile. Because I have everything in the same class, it's throwing me off. So this is supposed to be capital because it's an interface. So here, let's say I only want to show the price, and well, let's say I just want to show the name here. So for the mobile projection, I want to show only the name of the product. Okay, so if someone is accessing the application and they're using their phone, then the response is only gonna have the name. Let's say, just for the sake of demonstration, let's say get ID. Okay, we know that's gonna exist as well. So let's say the ID and the name. We want to do the same here. We don't need to pass in the ID, by the way. You might be thinking, hey, we need to pass in the ID, but we don't. And here for the projection, we just add the annotation projection here. So projection, and we have to specify a couple of things. So we have to give it a name. So let's say this is web. Okay, so for the web, this is gonna be what's gonna return for the product. And then here, after that, I want to tell it for what type. So I do types, and then I pass in the class. So that's going to be the product class. Okay, and we want to do something similar on the second one right here. So the second projection, and here I'm just going to say this is the mobile projection. So if someone is using their mobile phone, they're going to only see the ID. Maybe this is what I want my front end or my UI to do, right? I only want to deal with the ID and the name. But for the web, like with someone using the web browser, then I will give them the name, ID, and price. So if we run this now, and we're gonna check it out in Postman. So the application is back up, and let's open Postman. So here we're sending the get request to get all of the products, and if I pass in the projection, so I'm gonna do question mark. So every time you wanna pass your first parameter, you put the question mark. And here I want to say projection and then set this to web. Okay, so remember those names, they have to match. So we set this to web and this is mobile. So now if I send this, let's go back one more time. So for the web, we're only going to get the ID, the name, and the price. So we shouldn't get the in stock, and yeah, so we shouldn't get in stock. So let's go ahead and send this. You can see we have the name, the ID, and the price, but we don't have the in stock. Okay. However, if I change this to mobile, we should only get, okay, if we scroll down, the mobile is going to give us the ID and the name. So you can see right now we have the name, ID, and the price. So when I send this request, we're only going to get the name and the ID. So let's send it. You can see we have the name and the ID here. So that's how you would use projection if you want to limit the properties that are returned whenever you make the request to get the information. And you can also use the other parameters that we used earlier. So for instance, I can say, hey, give me the first product, and then projection is mobile, and I can send this. You can see it works just fine. You can see we only get the name and the ID. Change this to web, send it. Now we get the price as well. So you can do and then pass in, the size and all the other things. They should all work still. Another thing we can do is we can specify a specific method inside of the product repository. So for instance, let's say I want to retrieve a page for product. So we're gonna say product, and let's say find by let's say name contains, for instance, or containing or contains, either one will work. And then here we pass in the name, so that's going to be the name, and of course we have to pass in the pageable, and we want the pageable right here. Okay, so this will also work as well. So once you define the method in here, it's accessible inside the repository resource as well. So you will be part of the existing classes and functions that we've been using that we didn't create, that we've been using here. So for instance, as I add this find by name contains, I pass in the name and the page, and I can actually use this in my search whenever I run the application. So to show you how this works, I can just rerun it and let this application come up. All right, you can see the application is up and running. So to access this functionality, it's gonna go back to Postman, and what we need to do, so we're gonna remove the projection for now, and Spring Data REST uses search. So we're gonna do search. So that's the first parameter, the path that you put. before you actually put the name of your custom method. And then /, if we go back, we can see the name of this is find by name contains. Copy this, go back, and then pass it here. So that's going to be the method that we're going to call. And then we pass in the argument. So we put question mark, and we want the name, and let's say equal. Let me look at all the products that I have. Let's go back. So I have, I'm going to put Dell. Okay, so it's going to return 1, 2, 3. So it should return everything with Dell and the name. So let's go back and put Dell here. So if I send this, you can see now I have the Dell Latitude, Dell Precision, and Dell Inspiron. Okay, so I only have the Dell and of course all the other information as well that I had before. So that's pretty cool, right? We can manipulate this data in addition to everything that we already got with Spring. And you can also customize this, like you can custom, as you can see, we're using Spring standard here, find by name contains, and sometimes the performance of this can be a little bit poor. So you can change this to an actual like path in the URL. And the way you can do this is, for instance, let's say that instead of having to put in this name, which like I mentioned, can be, the performance can be a little bit bad, then we can do something like this. We can add the add res resource on this. And then here we can specify a path. So we can say this is gonna go to / find by name. Okay, so let's say we give it this, and it's supposed to be a string, and just like that. So now we can, instead of passing in this, which is gonna take Spring some time to like figure it out, and I mean, when I say sometimes, it depends on the size of the application, but the performance can be bad with Spring trying to figure all of this out and then return the information to you. So instead of having Spring doing all that, we pass in a custom path here for find by name that we can use instead of passing in this name here and have Spring do all this work. And you can also change this. So if you want to pass in a specific parameter instead of a name or something, you can change that as well, because you have to remember this name has to exist in your domain right here. So we have the name here and we're passing in the name here. But let's say you didn't want the actual name of the property to be here, so that you would be used in here. So let's say you didn't want that. You want something customized, for instance, right? So let's say we can pass in a param here. So we're going to do add param and then passing in what we want here instead of the name. But the name is still going to be used here because Spring Data needs to use that name to find that it exists as a property on this domain, and then do all the work and then return the data. So let's say here we say let's say we put product name or something, right? So now this will all work the same. The only thing is the performance can be a little bit better. So let's rerun the application. So the application is up. So let's go ahead and try that out. So if I go back to Postman, so I'm still gonna do all of this. Okay, so we're still gonna go to product/search, but instead of find by name contains, we're gonna use our path. So let's go back and copy this find by name and paste it here. And then instead of name, which is an actual field or property on the object in the Java code, which we don't want to expose, then we can pass in our custom keyword here, which is product name. So I can copy this, and then instead of name, I'm going to change this to product name equals Dell. Run this, same response, and we can change this to something else. What else do I have? Apple. I don't think I have anything Apple. HP, right? And send this. You can see now it still works, but the performance can be a little bit better. Your application can be a little bit faster. And of course, we can still pass, for instance, like the projection. So then we can do end again, and then projection equals web, and send that. You can see now we have the name and the price. And if we change this to mobile and send that, now we don't have the price anymore, just the name and the ID. So all of this still works, and you can use this information down below, the pagination information, to sort it out. All of this will still work. So there's a lot more that we can cover in terms of Spring and Spring Data. I mean, this really was just the basics. If you want to use the REST repositories and Spring Data and you want to build your service or web service with this architecture or with this technology, then it's really fast and it's really easy, and you can really customize it the way that you want. Now, one last thing I want to say is what you would usually see sometimes is a combination of both. So you wouldn't see that they would not have any controller or anything like that, because in most real world scenario, you would most likely have very complicated data that you're working with, and nothing is going to be as smooth as this. Like nothing's going to be like that. It's going to be really, really complicated. And then you will have to do a lot of tweaks here and there, and that's just how it works in the real world. Like you're never gonna see something so nicely done like this and you have no problem and you can just use all these interfaces or anything like that. It's usually gonna be really complicated. Your client or your customer is gonna ask for something very specific, and you will most likely need a controller. So in most cases you would see both. So you would see the actual controller, and then you would see that they're also using the repository resource as well, and then have Spring help them as much as possible. But at the same time, they're also having custom endpoints as well. Another thing you would see is they would never like return information like this. They would probably like wrap it around something like we saw in the Spring data repository here. You see that they send this embedded object, and then inside of it you have the data. So whenever you're working with an actual API, you wouldn't like return just the raw products like this. You would probably wrap it around something, around a class or something, and then pass it in there. So let me change this so that I don't cause any issue here. So this is supposed to be repository, rename, so product repository. That works for me. And import this Java util. All right, so again, I'm gonna comment this out, and you can make the decision whether or not you wanna use this. So for now, I'm just gonna comment it out, but the code is gonna be there, and everything is gonna be on GitHub. So check out the link in the description if you wanna use this as your starting point for your application. And I'll see you guys in the next one.